this is another question, and this is going to be a difficult one, Prof. This is from Harifani, but
do you mean the early ones? The other ones haven't been easy. If this is difficult, you're really setting me up here.
Yeah. So this is gonna be a fastball. It's from
Okay.
Arif Ari. It's also a perspective from the original state-owned enterprise from Jakpro, and he has two perspectives here. He's talking about. He understands that the national and subnational context in Indonesia, he would say the root cause to improve public service is incentive mechanism. And he sees that in two folds. The first one is focusing to outcome and having strategic views, which is by political leaders, would be disincentivized by voters as they are not seen working. So when you put that into, this is big goal, and then you lay it down in small steps and reviewing and all that, it would be too transparent for them. So it would be something that's not good for the political leaders. The people in this country are very visual. How to balance that situation? That's the first fold. The second one would be becoming a good public policy maker poses great challenges. A good public policy would increase quality of public service, but when government unit needs to meet such standards, it would be bittersweet situation. Can transforming government as regulator be solution? Which ownership can be done by the state-owned enterprise or private sector? So that's why we have, so in Jakarta, we have the complexity of some of the agencies are forming itself as both the regulators and also the operators. I mentioned that some of the state-owned enterprise works in the transportation. That means we're good. We have like Transjakarta working on the buses. We have MRT working on the mass rapid transportation. We have LRT working, Jakpro working on the LRT. So we have those enterprise. That's for the Department of Transportation, but that doesn't work really in other departments. So that's something that is transforming the government as regulator can be the solution to in that regards.
Yeah, but well, first you were right. These are two very difficult questions, and so you were honest in that. So thank you very much. The political incentives point, starting with that one, that's an excellent point. I mean, the political theory, as it were, as we know, behind performance measurement is that progress is made through clarity of goals and performance, and there's a competing kind of political theory that's out there. I mean, the political science Charles Lindblom was famous for an article called "The Science of Muddling Through," in which he said, that progress is not made through this great clarity on this, the big outcomes that we're trying to achieve. It's made by taking a lot of, small baby steps, in which case, we may agree to do something, but for completely different reasons that we kind of like it, but we're still willing to sign on to it. And so I understand that there's a different kind of, they're competing sets of kind of, theory behind, what the progress is. I guess I fall more on the clarity side, because I worry about, and this is, getting just a little bit off topic for this course, but I mean, it's, for our discussion this evening, I worry about the health of democracies, of yours and of certainly mine in the United States, where you have so many citizens that just look to government and say it can't do anything. That just it's completely broken, and that's not healthy. You can't have an enduring, effective government if that's the case. I mean, they've been doing polls in the U.S. going back to the 60s of, do you think the U.S. government, asking people the same question is, the extent to which they believe the U.S. government does the right thing most or much of the time. And it's never been particularly high. But, I work for our Congress. And, my agency is part of the Congress. So I don't work for President Trump. We're part of Congress. They get 19% of the American people say they trust Congress to do the right thing much or most of the time. I remember that I was once, telling a friend this, and he said to me, he says, "That's unbelievable. That's just crazy." And I said, "I know." And he says, "Who are those 19%?" And I said, "No, that's not my point. It's bad. It's so low. He couldn't believe it was that high." So I think that there's a real danger. And this doesn't get to the incentives for an individual politician. I understand that. But at a system level, I think there's an incredible danger to basic democracy if we're not able to build citizen trust in democratic institutions and the ability of government to deliver. And that's why that final challenge that I had at the beginning, the cross-cutting, was on government capacity, is that if as a global cost-cutting challenge that we face, we have to be able to deliver for our citizens. Now, but again, I want to acknowledge that's debatable. That there is, that other model is out there. On the second part of the question, we've confronted that too, of where of both regulator, I mean, not in the state-owned enterprise, circumstance, but where it's both regulator and promoter, as the case may be. What we had, for example, we had in the Gulf of Mexico a number of years ago, we had a major oil spill called Deepwater Horizon. The agency that was responsible for giving out selling those leases to, it's on federal land, federal waters, selling those leases to the private sector to do the oil drilling. So it had an incentive. Part of its mission was to go ahead and get exploration out there, was the same agency that was responsible for the regulation. And it didn't work. All the incentives were wrong on that stuff. Their whole job was drill, baby, drill. What used to be the slogan that was used. While at the same time they were supposed to be regulating the health and safety, the safety of and the regulatory aspect just got swamped. This was a case, notwithstanding what I was saying earlier about boxology, that you really did have to split them apart. And we had to create, two different agencies. One that can go ahead and focus on, you do your business job. You get those leases out there so that the private sector can drill. A separate agency that has to come in and do the regulation. We've seen that problem show up in a number of other mission areas as well, and probably the solution needs to be to tear these apart, to where this is a case rather than boxology of moving everyone together, but actually breaking them apart into different agencies. But again, I know that the state-owned enterprise issue is deeper than that. That's the closest analogous situation we have in the United States. Interesting.
That's something that's interesting because you actually had that case in the U.S., right?
Yes.
In that drilling for oil, and I guess for us, these questions need to be brought up, whether that is needed in other aspects or other sectors within our government or even the central government. We do have attendees, participants from the central government. So that's also an intriguing question for us all. Now there's questions more into, I want to bring more into the strategic and practical questions here, Prof. Chris. And if I may, I know that the schedule was supposed to end by 11 a.m. and it would be your time that would be done. But if I may, I would like to add probably 15 to 20 minutes because there's a lot of questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
All right.
No
so I'll move on to the next question. Here's the question that Pak Endra is curious to ask. That he's from the partnership department. So we have a department focused on how to collaborative partnership. At present, regional management does need a public management revolution that requires the participation of all stakeholders. This requires equal ability to run it. That's his premise. How to strive for that commonality where currently there is still a wide gap in the people's capacity, even among internal administrator. So that's an interesting question that he feels that this is the case that we have right now.
That's an excellent, and it's sadly it's a pretty common problem, as I'm sure your colleague knows, is that one of the, not only do we need to involve stakeholders, but in many cases we need to help those stakeholders build the capacity in order to participate. And that takes where we see that is play out is in at least two ways. One is that consistent with the 2030 agenda, but even good practice is that we need to make sure that as we're reaching out to stakeholders, that we're not just defining the stakeholders as already privileged and articulate and organized kind of interests within society, because they already have access to us. We already know them. Our kids go to the same schools with it. They're already. What we need to do is that we need to make sure that their voices are not unimportant, but we need to make sure that we are very intentional in thinking about how are we going to get the voices of those that are historically marginalized, of those that don't have the opportunity to talk, that often aren't asked, that at a technical level sometimes don't have the technology, that if it's a matter of doing an online survey, or making sure that it's just not having a meetings that are in evenings when people that are working a second job aren't able to come in and participate. So I think that the first part of that building capacity is to be very intentional in thinking about how are we going to involve the marginalized populations, and making sure that we really do have the full vision of stakeholders on that. The second aspect of that is understanding that stakeholder management is, as I was saying in one of the slides, really is a different skill set. And it's, there are trainings that people take on that in order to be, obviously you're quite skilled at this, good moderators, to know how to do something like that. That one of my favorite examples on this is that back to our Environmental Protection Agency, I remember years ago talking to the strategic planner at EPA, and they were talking about how they were trying to hire more skills in kind of facilitation negotiation, basically what I had been talking about. And he said to me, he gave me such a vivid mental picture of what he was talking about. He said, Chris, we have world-class scientists on our staff in environmental issues. And they are really, really good in telling you kind of based on how bad the soil is, how much, chemicals have been poured into that, what the death rates are going to be from childhood leukemia and diseases and all that. They can tell you all that. He said, but I can't send them to a town hall meeting in a poor community on a Sunday night and have them explain to people why the kids are dying. Because they'll come in with their graphs and they'll show, this is it. And guess what? More kids are going to die in the coming years. We need those world-class scientists, but we can't send them out to do that. And so there's the two aspects of being intentional and understanding that there is a skill set, and be willing to build and invest in people that have those skills, that are good at that, at facilitation and moderation, and negotiation with different communities.
Thank you. And I guess this touched upon, there's actually two similar additional questions in regards of conveying a message. One is a question from Ibu Dewi. She's from the Department of DPP APP, Women and Women Empowerment, so Children and Women Empowerment. So we have an own department on that, Prof. And she's interested in the mechanism, the best. I mean, there's no the best one, but the how to make the policies that can involve the voices of the children's, the elderly, other minorities. And there's the second question resounds to that is from Ibu Ika from the Department of Communications and Informations, which is she's concerned on the climate change issue, that even the US citizens, which is view, is that are split in two in climate change cases. Half would believe about this issue, but the other half wouldn't. How would the US government and academic address this issue in the sense of collaboration with the people that is important? And how do we create programs with half of the citizens that are in doubt? That's also, that's a current challenge. I mean, probably us because we are in the forefront of the issues of COVID, but we know that there's people putting message up there that there's hoax. Vaccine is right up on the corner, but people are saying, no, anti-vaccine is you don't get vaccine and do it otherwise. So what's resounding to still on that, the questions on how to convey and how to listen in different stakeholders. Maybe you have additional views in regards to both those questions.
Yeah, thank you for both of those, and they're both excellent. Is that
I think I lost you.
There we go. Sorry, I was just saying that both of these questions are excellent. Just in fact, all the questions this evening have just been fantastic. On the first question, and this won't be any news to your colleague who asked it, is I think probably the single most important thing that we can do to advance the interests of women and children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, is for those of us that aren't in that program to not adopt a mindset that it's not our issue because there is that program, and say that, well, no, I mean, we have a women's division, and so they take care of all those issues, and so I can keep doing whatever it is I'm doing. And if that's the case, then we've kind of failed. And I know probably, or I'm assuming a large part of their responsibility is also advocacy within government. It is trying to sensitize others that think of issues as use a gender lens, or use a lens that asks about the distribution of benefits across generations or impact on children for programs that you may not naturally think of that, or at least historically, I should say, that we haven't naturally thought about that. As I would assume in Indonesia, but I'll just keep it in the United States, that is still, I'm going to confess, that is a big struggle for us, that we still work at that. Now, there are a number of countries around the world, Latin America seems to be among the leaders on this, that are asking that there be, and have this as a formal part of the process, what they call gender sensitive budgeting, and asking for that each of the budgets, and it's not isolating, okay, 5% of the budget for this particular program needs to go to women, or 20% or 50%, half, since they're half the population. It's more infusing into, what are the implications for the program, for the service delivery, from a gender perspective? What are the implications of this service delivery from a perspective of persons with disabilities, with persons with, with the agent? And I'll bet you, I mean, knowing what I already know about the transportation and infrastructure projects that you all have, and again, congratulations on the award. I talked about that with the mentors last week. I'm quite certain, quite confident that that's part of the planning, right? When you're thinking of an infrastructure project, you're probably thinking about, and probably at the forefront, what does this look like for someone with disabilities? Whether they're in a wheelchair, if they're blind, if they're not able to hear the bells that would tell them that a train is coming. So I think, the most important answer is certainly we need organizations or dedicated units within government that advocate and keep that at the front of our heads. But those of us that aren't in those units need to be very intentional in thinking about how do we make sure all the voices are included, and what are the implications for our programs for those voices, and delivery. How does it look different to people that are at different areas? One tiny example on this is that we did some work just recently. Is that, our Internal Revenue Service, that's our tax collection. We have an income-based tax system, and so every year we have to submit all sorts of forms and documentations, and then based on that, that's how much we pay in our income taxes to the federal government. Like many other countries, we have dozens and dozens of different languages that people speak. And we went in and began to look at the website of our revenue office and just saying, is there guidance, is there help to people out there that don't speak English, where English is or may not be their primary language? And it was just lousy. Some of the guidance was out there, but a lot of it was just missing links. You'd click on something and it would take you to nowhere, to a 401 or whatever the error page. This page does not exist. And here people are going to this because they want to give the government money. That's why you go to this website, help me give you money, and we weren't making it easy for them. We, the government, wasn't making it easy for them. And so we really had to, beat up on our tax collectors and say, you've got to, reach out to people and understand that we're an incredibly diverse country. And you just can't have something out there in Spanish, which is great, but there's lots of other languages, and, for example, that you need to be out there, and you need to be, meeting people where they are rather than where you want them to be, is kind of the bottom line that we use on that. On the second question, I am acutely aware that we are, I think, the only large, market-driven democracy that has one of our two major political parties does not accept the reality of climate change as part of its ideology, as part of its stated positions. Other places that there's political differences on how fast we go to address climate change, or what strategies we should use, how heavy-handed the government, should it be regulations or economic incentives and all the rest. We have unfortunately a Republican Party that full stop does not believe it, and that creates for us just overwhelming political challenges, and in part this last presidential election was run on that. I'm very grateful that President-elect Biden has said on day one, we're going to rejoin Paris, the Paris Climate Accord. And that's small. There's the scope of the change is much more needs to be done on that, but that's going to be important. It is still important substantively, and it's important symbolically. I think that we're back, at least going to pretend to carry some of our weight globally on this. But it's very, very difficult, and the problem that we run into, and the we now is not just the United States, it's globally, is that by the time the deniers actually are willing to admit it, it will be far, far too late. And we still have, Florida gets hit by hurricanes 3, 4, 5 times every hurricane season. And they'll interview these people and go, well, no, it seems to be more storms coming, but I'm not willing to say that it's, that it's climate change. It just seems to be more storms. Some years have more, some years have less, and some years it's hot and some years it's cold. By the time they come around, we could end up being all baked or underwater, or, in really, really a disastrous situation. And so, I think it's hopefully when the president-elect or President Biden rejoins Paris, we'll be able to get some, additional regulatory changes out of his administration. I don't hold any hope, though, that our Congress is going to approve those, because, the Republicans will still control the Senate, and they don't buy it. And so it's a heartbreaking situation for us. I wish I knew the answer.
Yeah, that's a very difficult one, and I think that's also a challenging question for all countries around the globe, right? In terms of climate change, that's a real struggle that we see scientifically, but also there's the mindset is something that is very challenging.
Can I just one more thing on that's interesting from a U.S. context, is that the federal agency that is most advanced in thinking about climate change and the implications for its mission is our Department of Defense.
Really?
which is, it's funny. I mean, it's kind of the favorite agency of the people who deny the climate, right? And yet DOD is way out in front on that because they don't have the luxury of being deniers. I mean, there's scenarios that if we're at we're already at 1.5 degrees. If we hit 2,
Wow.
there are parts at 2 degrees centigrade. There are parts of the world that effectively will be flooded, which is an enormous national security challenge for all of us. I mean, there's the whole thing of the World Bank has been saying anywhere between 50 million to up to 200 million climate refugees within by the end of the century. What happens when wars begin to be fought over water? What happens when wars begin to be fought over famine? I mean, we're already seeing implications of that. A lot of the immigration that we've had into the southwest border from the United States from Central America is driven in part by the effects of climate change in Guatemala. And so it is an interesting thing that they don't have the luxury of being climate deniers. They have to act on it. And so just an interesting fact there. Sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. That's very interesting because I mean, who to lead? The agency to lead in this issue is very important, right? Like you said earlier on your keynote speech, and putting that department or that agency, that department in upfront of the climate change. I think that's a really interesting approach to look at it. And this is also coming, there's questions coming, concerns in regards to COVID here from Ibu Linda and Pak Ari Mufti. They're seeing that, so I'll start with Ibu Linda. She's mentioning questions like this. She's from Pamjaya, Jakarta Water Supply Regional State Enterprise. And she mentioned that you talked about the simplific logic model where there's 3 inputs that are needed, such as staff, funds, and facility to gain outputs and outcomes that are targeted. So she's really listening to your keynote speech.
Thank you.
But when we find there's no sufficient resources for those 3 inputs, what do you think is best the part we should provide first, or at least can promote better outputs and outcomes? And Pak Ari Mufti from Transjakarta, another state-owned enterprise, also has that concern, and he's asking how to apply a result-oriented platform while spending is pressured and in these current circumstances. So they're really feeling that effect of COVID-19 towards how they manage things internally, and also in terms of development for the future. And if you may, you point out some of your views in regards to this.
Yeah, no, those are both excellent points, and it is a very real problem, right? I mean, we're seeing it just to take one tiny example that's still within the kind of the broader public health community, is that a number of our programs that are dealing with people that have opioid addictions and drug abuse in this country is just a major high risk area. We lose 70,000 people a year on due to drug abuse in the U.S. It's many of those are getting squeezed, and with funds going, especially at the local level, to COVID, and either funds or even just kind of capacity, brain, space in people's heads, and so if someone has an addiction and they're in a program, you just can't cut them off, or you just can't say, hey, we're going to take 6 months off and then we're going to get back to you once we look this kind of COVID thing. They're going to fall right back into the behaviors and that got them into trouble in the first place. And so this is a very real issue, these types of trade-offs that are taking place. At one level, that what the logic model is intended to do is to help you highlight, it gets back to a little bit that earlier conversation we were having, is to help to highlight for decision makers the consequences of their decisions. And that is that, as non-political people, that is, not elected, we don't necessarily, I mean, we have a right and even a responsibility to make sure that our elected officials understand the consequences and the trade-offs that they're enforcing. And if they don't make them, then we're going to have to make them on their behalf. But we ought to be clear about those. And so what a logic model lets you do is, in a sense, visually begin to have some of those conversations. I mean, it's very often one way that people think about logic models is that each of those, from the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, they'll say it's an if-then. If we do this, then this happens. And then once you're there, if this happens, then this will happen, and then this will happen. And it allows us to begin to have conversations and to have the data in place that says, for example, if you reduce this program by 40%, then this is going to happen. Here's the consequence of that happening. And we have, by the way, data that shows that if we have 40% lower, let's assume a linearity, 40% fewer dollars, 40% fewer outputs, then that's going to lead to different outcomes. That's going to lead to lower outcomes. And we have the information in the data that shows us that. That doesn't mean that we're always going to prevail, because policymakers have to make those more macro level trade-offs. And that's understood, and that's why they're there. That's what they were elected to do. But it's our responsibility to make sure that it's our responsibility to advocate for our constituencies, but it's also our responsibility to make sure that the decision makers have the information they need in order to intelligently make those trade-offs. I think too often, at least, and I'll keep it exclusively to the US context, too often in the US context, dollars go up or down without anyone being able to know what the performance consequences are on that. We had an estimate by a couple of OMB officials, these were political people, one that worked for President Bush and one that worked for President Obama. So a Republican and a Democrat had done an analysis, and they said out of every dollar the US government spends, they estimated that less than 2 cents of that, so 98 cents out of every dollar, was not based on a sound evaluation base. And so to the extent that we can begin to build that evaluation base, we can begin to show them the consequences of that. Right now, if you give an agency 20% more, who knows if good stuff is going to happen? If you cut them 20%, who knows if good stuff is going to happen? There's actually a very quick kind of funny story on this. Years ago, there was a management improvement initiative in government that was designed to start getting agencies to start measuring their performance. And one of the things that many agencies came up with is, oh no, you can't measure our performance. I mean, we're too complex to, too much going on to be able to measure our performance. And the response was, okay, if we can't measure your performance, let's do an experiment. Let's cut your budget by 50% and see if we observe anything bad happening. And if nothing else, we'll cut it by another 50%. And another 50 until we actually observe something bad happen. You'd be surprised. No, you wouldn't be surprised because you're all very sophisticated. Very, very quickly, agencies that said you can't manage performance said, oh, okay, here's our performance measures, as soon as you advocated cutting them by 50%. And so part of it is making sure that we have the data, we have the analysis, and then we provide decision makers with that analysis. And then it's their job to actually make those decisions.
Wow. That would be an interesting exercise, yeah? Asking for them to cut their performance and responding to that. And this is actually this other question. I would, Professor Chris, I know in regards with the time, I would just give 3 more questions. 2 is more on the experience side, I guess. And the other last one would be, probably your thought of forecasting the future on a specific issue that one of the participants is seeing. Now, coming back to putting the focus on it, Pak Asep Ruli Ferdiansyah from Paramadina has a question in this perspective. As the policy made is aimed to produce or achieve outcome and it's effectively implemented with the society to rise up the life quality, as the government lens is limited, that is becoming the reason why the collaboration among government and stakeholder is necessity. As the main aim of policy is the outcome is itself, I believe that public policy for the future would be more challenging as the people participation through the new media will increase, and also the implementation of e-government on the public surface will be highly demanded as well for the higher life prosperity and quality. So he wants your point of view on the practice that you have done, the policy design based on evidence to cover not only the intended outcome, but as well as being presented also the unintended consequences that might be the outcome from the policy that commonly missed to be considered.
Yeah,
So that's the blind spot that usually that we policymakers, we just go forward with this decision, right? But then again, there's this blind spot that we miss, and he would like to hear from your experience in regards to that.
That's really excellent. I mean, there's the short answer on that is that's what an effective enterprise risk management program will help to tease out and identify. That is that, within the language of enterprise risk management, ERM, all risk is uncertainty. And some of that uncertainty can be negative. That is the way we would normally characterize as risk. Some of that uncertainty can be positive, things that you want to kind of break your way or come, that if it happens, it'll help you achieve your goals. But as part of that, one of the things that you do want to be focusing on is what could go wrong that we hadn't thought about. And that is tough within even an ERM context, because it's just that kind of the human mind often doesn't work that way, right? Or certainly in the human mind in a public policy of I'm agreeing with the thesis of the question. In a public policy context, usually doesn't work that way of what could go wrong here. But that's what ERM as a discipline is designed to help us think about. And it's then designed to help us, think about the trade-offs and the risk of that happening. Well, if we do this, here's something that may not work for us, or where we could fail or even have an unintended consequence. How much of that risk are we willing to assume? How much of it, are we willing to not do because of that? Or what are we willing to not do? How great is that risk? And so the ERM is the device that's designed to help us get to that.
All right. Here's another question from Mishka Belfast, again from Paramanda Institute, Public Policy. And her question is your experience in probably the experience that you had in UN and sorts, what do you suggest for developing countries in Asia or Africa in order to handle wicked issues that you explained? She believes that any different strategies, she believes that there's different strategies because we can absolutely equalize the US strategic planning in other developing countries. Her specific question is, do you think that multinational cooperation will help the governance in order to face that wicked issues?
I think it has to. I think one of the most unfortunate features over the last 4 years of the United States has been the attack on multilateralism from the US, whether it be the climate accords. I'm also on the audit committee or an independent expert advisory committee for the World Health Organization, and the US withdrawal from the WHO, or at least the president's announcement that he would withdraw, but we won't, under President-elect Biden. I think, these issues are global in nature, and we're only going to do that, we're only going to solve them through multilateralism. I think that also means from those of us in the wealthier countries, it means we're going to have to be willing to make substantial financial commitments to poorer parts of the world. What I worry about most about climate change, and it's not just me, I mean, obviously many have said this, is that those have contributed the least will suffer the most. The way the climate crisis is going. That's both domestically in the US, but also internationally. And so we're going to have to multilateralism is going to have to come with a healthy dose of financing and resources in order to rebalance the international system so that we're paying the price for the, we, and now I'm meaning, people in the global north, are willing to step up and pay the price for what we've contributed to climate change, and so that those that have suffered the most are, don't now suffer the most going forward as well. But I think it's, having the U.S. back on the world stage, I think is going to be absolutely vital from a standpoint of multilateralism. I think what's going to be very important, though, is that we also think about that it's not a return to the old days of right after the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Soviet Union, where the U.S. wanted to be the great global hegemon, and and it was just a G1 kind of situation out there. I think multilateralism will have to be genuine in that regard, in understanding, just like we've been talking about with our societies, also the world, making sure that historically marginalized voices that hadn't been heard, or if they had been heard were quickly discounted or run over, are also brought to a seat at the table and have an effective voice and power in determining the future of the course, determining our course going forward.
Yeah, I think the world was watching during the election. Yeah, very tight, and that was. I believe even for myself, it's an amazing news listening to that, especially in regards into climate change, and hopefully other commitments from the U.S., because it really shows leadership where it has to be. And I guess you point out a strong answer to that question. You straightforwardly said it has to, and I believe this collaboration is not starting with us, but also in that level in national, multinational areas. And the last question.
Well, just before we get to that, just one more thing on that is that I had right after President Trump won, I was talking with, I was at one of my trips overseas. I was dealing with some African colleagues. And one of them, he said something to me that's really struck with me, and I've since seen him many times since and reminded him about how moved I was. He said, Chris, for a generation or more, the U.S. had been lecturing the rest of the world about the difference between strong men and strong institutions. He said, you're about to have your test, and that is the strength of institutions of democracy and transparency and human rights. Are they more powerful than a strong man, the autocrat, and that's something that I think is and this is where the dean, I think, was right on, of bringing a degree of humility now. If and that's a big if there's anything that's good that came out of the Trump era, as we're now moving in, I hope that we will have a degree of humility going forward in our partnerships internationally that we have not had in the past, and understanding how fragile democracy is in the United States, how perilous it is, and what backsliding can look like, and be careful about who you lecture. I think that'll be an important part. But I'm sorry, back to you.
Oh, that's a very good comment, and I would aim in for that, Chris. That's a really big hope for us all. For the last question, and this is somewhat a dreamer side, but also a vision side, probably from you. The question comes from Ibu Yuli Fazriani. She is actually from the central government, so sort of like BPSDM is like the Jakarta Public Policy Center, but from the central government, and she wants to hear from your thoughts, from your side, on the crucial issues that will come up 5 to 10 years later in regards to technology and human resource policy in the global, and how do we anticipate in the sense of organization and management and leadership towards those specific issues?
That's a great question to conclude on, and I just wanted to, before I get into it, just thank you, obviously, for the expert moderation. Thank you so much for this, and for all the really great questions. Now I really wish that we could be together, because this is the type of stuff that ought to be carrying on now over lunch and into afternoon sessions, into dinners and all the rest. And just
And
it's been a fascinating.
And it's amazing that the question doesn't stop while we were doing a Q&A. The question doesn't really stop here in this sheet that I have in mind. So it's amazing how also the participant has been amazing all day focused in this first kickoff. So it's great for us all.
Well, good. I mean, it's getting late for me here, but I'd be delighted to come back and finish up with, carry on the conversation at another point. The answer, I think, is at least twofold. And one of the good things, one of the emerging disciplines is foresight, is to and it is as a discipline to try and look, broader into the horizons as to what are the big issues out there. There are two that I particularly focus on is one we've already been discussing, is of course climate change. Is that I think if we internationally don't deal with that and don't deal with it very quickly, nothing else is going to really matter, and it's going to drive everything else. It's of widening economic inequality, of loss of human rights, loss of democratic institutions. The UN has a really frightening term that they use for what the future could look like. They refer to it as climate apartheid, after the old South Africa, where those that are wealthy enough can never fully escape the consequences, but can put either virtual or physical walls around and just let the rest of the world kind of fry and go to waste. And that's something we absolutely have to avoid. The second thing, though, and this is what I made a passing comment that in the presentation, that it'd be good to have a larger discussion with people about about AI and machine learning. Just like it's going to have enormous implications for the structure of work and what work is, and for good or ill within the private sector. So too, obviously, does it have potentially enormous implications for government. And some of that can be very, very positive. Some of that could end up being very, very negative. I mean, we see countries around the world, that already are incredibly advanced with facial recognition technology, that, that meaningful dissent, political dissent is quickly vanishing there. If you don't have the right to be anonymous, I'm not sure that, what dissent really means in circumstances. But what happens when entire jobs, in a sense, go away? We've just had our politics completely turned upside down over the last couple of decades about the loss of industrial jobs, as many of them were shipped to other countries as part of globalization. What happens now when we start losing entire white collar industries? I have a colleague that says that's more focused on this, and says the notion of chartered accountants, what we would call CPAs, they, as an industry, that may not exist in another 5 to 10 years. That's all going to be AI. And if you paid $100,000 to get a college degree, and you're told not only do you not have this job, but your industry no longer exists, that's not just bad for you. That's going to have political implications and repercussions, and who you view as the other, who you view did something bad to you, all that sort of stuff. And it could get very ugly very quickly. And so but then on the other hand, AI could be enormously liberating too. If we can automate a lot of stuff that traditionally had not been automated. So it's all about how we're going to control it and how we're going to channel it. So I think AI is, and it's just going to be enormous, but that's secondary to climate change. That's the one we got to deal with as a global community right away.
Thank you very much, Professor Chris Mim. I think to close that would be a sort of potential topics that the participant could use in regards of taking it to another level and reflecting it in Indonesia's case, whether those issues are to address not those issues, but how to address those issues in the near future. Again, I think I would like to, first of all, conclude this very fruitful session. First, we had the honor of having both the governors, and it's been nice because this sort of discussion and talks is very rich, and in both different continents. I would need to travel, 1.5 days to go just to your place,
Yeah.
Professor Chris. So it's been an honor having the governor, having the dean also to open up, having all the
Yes.
colleagues from Maryland that follow through. And I know it's in your time, teman-teman semua. Ini Pak Profesor Chris ini sampai pukul 11.36 tengah malam nih bersama kita. Gitu. So I just mentioned that you're with us for almost midnight and very enthusiastically answering all the questions. I also thank the participant of all the questions that they come in. It's all great questions and very tough one, very different perspective. And I'm sorry that I couldn't, or we couldn't elaborate more due to time limit. But I would like to close this first session on the start of workshop. Hope for tomorrow and the next day. After that, we have the same or even more excitement of the discussion. We'll talk more on the resilient city, right, tomorrow with Professor Jared Jen Knapp, and talking on the resilient city in the 21st century. And also in day 3, a keynote from Professor Deb Nemner on modern infrastructure for sustainable cities. Thank you again. Hopefully for the participant not to leave the forum because we would have the house work notes to come along through the workshop just for 15 minutes or so, and to recap of the today's session. Again, I would leave to you if you have want to rest, of course, for the next day. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
My great honor. Good luck to you all, and look forward to talking with you again soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Min. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you, Professor Mike.
you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you,
Baik,
Prof.
terima kasih teman-teman, luar biasa antusiasnya dari teman-teman semua. Saya lihat sampai saat ini semua mengikuti, bahkan tadi sampai pembicaraan selesai. Terus pertanyaan bermunculan. Mohon maaf sekali lagi tidak bisa menggali terus semuanya mengingat waktu yang dihadirkan. Barangkali atas permintaan dari panitia JPPC, panitia workshop and training public policy for the future, ada beberapa hal yang ingin saya sampaikan terlebih dahulu, bahwasannya dari absensi yang ada pada hari ini akan direkap, lalu rekan-rekan semua akan dibagi kelompok. Di dalam diskusi ini tentu ada mentor-mentor yang hadir bersama kita semua, yang akan mendampingi selama 15 hari ke depan. Kami ingin memberikan pengalaman yang terbaik bagi teman-teman semua, walaupun ini memang yang pertama kami adakan, dan khususnya internasional bersama dengan University of Maryland. Tapi kami ingin memberikan yang terbaik, dan kami siap terhadap input dan masukan sepanjang proses perjalanannya. Sebelum saya tutup, barangkali saya mau mengajak diskusi. Barangkali ada 1-2 komen dari teman-teman semua terhadap sesi yang pertama ini, apa yang teman-teman dapat dari sesi ini, dan barangkali kami juga bisa mengangkat diskusinya, mengarahkan diskusinya yang lebih baik. Silakan bagi teman-teman peserta khususnya, kami buka komen khususnya terhadap keynote speaker, apa yang didapat, apa yang teman-teman pengetahuan atau pengalaman yang teman-teman dapat dari sesi pertama hari ini.
Can I give a comment, Pak?
Silakan, Pak. Dari nama dan dari mana? Terima kasih, Pak.
Saya Rudi Hartono, Pak, dari LRT. Satu hal yang saya in personal mendapatkan, bahwa kita dapatkan semacam overview yang cukup bermanfaat menurut hemat saya, yang terkait dengan leadership, juga public policy, kemudian juga bisa mendapatkan benchmarking apa yang terjadi di Amerika, apa dari sisi policy maker. Kemudian satu Pak yang mungkin apakah bisa di dalam selama sharing session itu ada semacam interaktif gitu, jadi tidak ketinggalan dulu, karena kan kalau kayak tadi pada akhirnya walaupun nanti ada pro kontra ya, selama sesi itu apakah boleh kita raise up gitu kan, kemudian ada discussion atau menunggu sampai dengan selesainya materi dipaparkan. Mungkin dan kemudian yang bertanya mungkin bisa langsung, apakah bisa dia untuk interaktif langsung gitu. Itu it's just a thought yang sehingga si Prof Min seperti tadi dia bisa langsung interaktif dengan si penanya yang kebetulan mana tahu it's related with his role and function. Itu saja Pak. But it's overall is very good and great to have this session, Pak. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Rudi. Saya kira saya sangat senang. Saya juga pengen infokan ya. Why University of Maryland? University of Maryland itu sebenarnya salah satu yang public school yang terbaik di Amerika, khususnya soal public policy. Mereka ada beberapa penghargaan, beberapa alumni yang mempunyai penghargaan Nobel, Pulitzer Prize buat jurnalis begitu ya. Ada yang punya Emmy dan seterusnya. Jadi memang kalibernya juga luar biasa, dan juga dari pembicara kita perlu diketahui memang tadi sudah disampaikan di awal juga punya pengalaman dengan UN, dengan multinational atau organization, international organization gitu. Jadi rasanya memang betul saya pribadi mengalami luar biasa insight dan experience-nya dari. Terima kasih Pak Rudi, khususnya terkait masukan yang disampaikan, kami catat masukannya, kami coba olah sebaik mungkin semua masukan yang disampaikan oleh rekan-rekan semua. Terima kasih. Barangkali ada key takeaways yang teman-teman rasakan, yang teman-teman dapat hari ini.
Boleh Pak, saya.
Silakan.
Terima kasih Pak Moderator dan para panitia. Saya Mulyadi dari Dinas Kesehatan. Jadi sangat menarik sekali sesi kita pagi hari ini, dan ini merupakan sesi sharing untuk keseluruhan jajaran di Pemerintah Provinsi DKI Jakarta. Dan sungguh luar biasa sudah mendatangkan Profesor Chris di dalam pertemuan hari ini. Nah, yang pertama bahwa kita tentu menyadari sebagian memahami dan mungkin ada sebagian yang masih hilang. Nah, di dalam pemahaman seperti ini perlu ada review dari panitia secara keseluruhan apa yang disampaikan oleh Profesor Chris tadi. Barangkali kita ada yang salah tafsir, apa kurang tepat di dalam mengartikan, tentu menjadi satu persamaan persepsi untuk kita semua. Karena sebagian juga bisa paham semua, tapi sebagian juga mungkin 90% atau bisa juga masih kurang. Tentu ini perlu persamaan persepsi, sehingga secara utuh hari ini kita mendapatkan satu persepsi yang sama yang disampaikan oleh tim atau panitia. Sehingga setelah kita melakukan proses ini, tentu pada proses perjalanan diskusi nanti tidak lagi mengalami kendala atau perdebatan karena ketidaksamaan di dalam memahami sebuah sesi seperti ini. Itu saja, terima kasih.
Dari Pak Mulyadi ada apa yang dirasakan, bagaimana terhadap materinya, apa yang didapat hari ini? Ya, untuk keseluruhan memang kita bisa memahami, tapi memang ada beberapa poin yang hampir harus juga disadari oleh kita. Ada kendala di dalam bahasa. Baik. Tentu kita harus samakan dulu persepsinya. Nah, tentu persamaan persepsi ini disampaikan oleh panitia secara review keseluruhan. Tentu tidak detail, tapi secara garis besar saja. Terima kasih. Baik Pak Mulyadi, terima kasih. Saya perlu sampaikan juga ke teman-teman semua, tentu tidak semua masukan bisa langsung didengarkan oleh saya pribadi di dalam ruangan ini ataupun teman-teman panitia dalam ruangan ini. Oleh karenanya kami menyiapkan sebuah tautan berupa evaluasi penyelenggaraan workshop dan training pada hari ini. Rekan-rekan semua bisa mengaksesnya pada tautan yang disampaikan dari chat. Silakan bagi masukan-masukannya bisa langsung dituliskan untuk kami olah dan kami perbaiki untuk kedepannya. Untuk selanjutnya ada yang sekarang fokusnya kepada ini ya, kepada yang dialami atau dirasakan teman-teman. Ada yang ingin ini? Silakan Mbak Ika.
Ya, terima kasih Mas Fazrul dan teman-teman. big applause untuk teman-teman BPSDM. Terima kasih sekali sudah mempertemukan kami semua dengan profesor-profesor di University of Maryland. Kesempatan yang luar biasa, jarang banget gitu ya bagi kami yang mungkin belum punya kesempatan untuk kuliah di luar negeri gitu ya. Dan ini top speaker semua gitu. Jadi banyak sekali mungkin yang bukan mungkin banyak sekali yang bisa kita dapatkan gitu. Mau meng-highlight saja mungkin beberapa hal terkait yang tadi disampaikan oleh majornya governor ya atau major tadi
Governor.
Mr. Governor sama profesor yang terakhir Profesor Nim, bahwa tarik banget dengan yang IRM-nya itu ya, Enterprise Risk Management. Kalau menurut saya mungkin itu bisa menjadi salah satu yang menjadi poin penting yang harus kita terus galangkan, Mas Fazlur gitu, karena seperti beberapa government agency itu kita memang harus diakui kita lemah ya di risk management gitu. Dan ini menjadi salah satu poin penting karena ambil contoh di masa penanggulangan banjir ini, kita kayaknya udah mulai ada risk manajemennya gitu Mas, dari tahun sebelumnya. Dari awal tahun ini kita sudah melakukan risk management gitu ya, dan sudah mulai satu-satu tiap-tiap OPD dengan champion programnya itu udah satu-satu udah kelihatan gitu, sehingga mudah-mudahan di akhir tahun, di awal tahun 2021 risk management itu bisa kelihatan dan kita semuanya bisa terlepas dari banjir gitu ya, bencana banjir dan sampah gitu. Nah itu yang pertama, mungkin IRM itu bisa menjadi pelajaran yang penting untuk kedepannya bagi seluruh OPD. Yang kedua adalah saat si profesor itu bilang tentang bahwa saat ini mungkin yang penting untuk diikuti adalah bahwa si outcome dan results itu menjadi pusat dari semua program gitu. Dan sebenarnya itu sudah kita lakukan ya Mas ya, dengan yang si Money Follow program itu di Jakarta kan kita sudah melakukannya gitu. Tetapi mungkin itu bisa menjadi highlight yang kedua juga, bahwa isunya adalah kalau kita melakukan seperti yang si profesor lakukan dengan si virtual organization yang tadi Al Gore sebutkan, di referensi dari Al Gore, banyak sekali perubahan besar yang harus kita hadapi gitu ya. Bukan hanya struktur dari organisasi kita sendiri gitu ya, kemudian dari hubungan dari interagency gitu ya, karena kita terbiasa untuk menciptakan program itu within the agency, bukan interagency gitu. Tetapi mungkin dengan adanya fokus kepada si program atau output itu di tengah-tengah gitu, itu bisa menjadi salah satu problem solver dari segala macam permasalahan kita yang sebenarnya interkoneksi gitu antara OPD gitu. Mungkin itu Mas Fazlur, terima kasih.
Makasih banget nih Ibu Ika. Pengamatannya luar biasa. IRM rasanya juga memang jadi masukan bagi kita semua. Tapi ada satu kunci yang saya mau komen untuk yang tadi Mbak Ika tadi sampaikan sebenarnya, bahwa ada perubahan besar di situ ya, menempatkan outcome. Ada beberapa pertanyaan yang tadi udah juga menyinggung, silo itu gimana sih pecahinnya gitu ya. Kemudian bagaimana kalau nggak ada capacity? Satu kata yang muncul dari Prof. Chris adalah it's hard. Dia mengakui itu susah gitu. Jadi ini orang yang udah di UN, di mana segala macam gitu ya, terus dia mengatakan ya memang sulit gitu. Jadi aku pikir ini juga mudah-mudahan jadi bekal untuk kita, untuk artinya memang harus fight untuk itu, karena memang sulit untuk menciptakan suasana tersebut. Makasih pengamatannya Mbak Ika.
Aku boleh respon sedikit Mas?
Boleh.
Gitu. Jadi respon ke Mas Fazlur juga ke Profesor Nim tadi ya, bahwa ada satu kalimat yang dia sebutkan memang annual assessment. Tadi kan kita ngomongin IRM itu pasti ujung-ujungnya annual assessment ya Mas ya. Annual assessment itu in strategic objective reviews itu it's very hard. Di sana juga mereka susah melakukannya. Semua government agency susah melakukannya. Terus dia kasih pertanyaan, what's the problem here gitu. Maksudnya dia sebenarnya juga masih mereka-reka gitu. Mereka di US juga masih mereka-reka sebenarnya what's the best option, what's the best plan, dan mungkin kita 11-12 sama kita gitu. Maksudnya itu hal yang harus yang bareng-bareng dicermati dan dipecahkan bareng gitu kali Mas. Terima kasih.
Betul. Memang beliau juga menyampaikan bahwa beberapa hal juga beliau belajar dari kita, seperti BUMD itu bukan hal yang familiar buat beliau begitu ya. Dan juga ada hal-hal yang sama-sama mengadres. Oleh karenanya memang di sesi-sesi ini barangkali nanti kita bisa juga saling memperkaya satu sama lain ya terhadap sesinya. Sekali lagi makasih Mbak Ika. Ada lagi yang ingin menyampaikan apa namanya pengalaman yang menarik yang didapatkan dari sesi hari ini?
Mas, boleh?
Boleh. Dari mana?
Saya Miska dari Paramadina Public Policy Institute.
Oh iya, silakan.
Ya sebenarnya saya bukan dari pemerintahan, jadi saya sebenarnya kayak agak kurang paham gitu tentang kayak pola-pola pemerintahan. Cuman saya juga belajar karena saya juga mahasiswa S2 di Paramadina juga. Nah, saya alhamdulillah senang banget dapat kesempatan ini. Terus juga saya bukan dari pekerja di pemerintahan kan, jadi saya belajar banyak banget dari keynote speaker tadi, dari sesi tadi. Dan saya sebenarnya kurang tahu ya kalau dari segi pemerintahan gimana, tapi saya melihat dari segi saya sebagai seorang mahasiswa, sebenarnya ternyata dari Profesor Mim tadi menjelaskan bahwa tidak hanya masyarakat yang istilahnya mengharapkan pemerintahan yang baik gitu. Tidak hanya masyarakat yang mengharapkan transparansi, negosiasi, dan relationship building gitu. Dan ternyata dari pemerintahnya itu sendiri pun juga sebenarnya mengharapkan itu gitu. Jadi saya dapat poin penting banget, apalagi ada satu kalimat, leadership is not just from a minister, president, mayor, or something like that, but also leader from a very small unit. Jadi saya benar-benar mendapat insight yang banyak banget dari keynote speaker yang Profesor Mim tadi. Terima kasih kesempatannya.
Terima kasih. Senang mendengarnya ada dari Paramadina yang mengikuti dan nambah perspektif terhadap public policy for the future. It's great to hear you joining with us. Ada lagi dari rekan-rekan yang lain? Pengalaman yang dirasa dari sesi ini? Ada lagi? Kalau atau pertanyaan di sini sudah ya. Barangkali saya atas nama panitia dari JPPC, panitia dari Workshop and Training Public Policy for the Future, mengucapkan terima kasih besar atas perhatian dan waktu yang disempatkan oleh Bapak, Ibu, rekan-rekan semua. Insya Allah saya kembali ingatkan besok kita ada sesi untuk keynote kedua yang bicara terkait dengan Resilient City pada pukul 8 ya. Pada pukul 8 untuk tautan nanti akan oleh rekan-rekan panitia disampaikan. Untuk kedepannya tentu saya tadi sampaikan bahwa adanya mentor-mentor juga yang akan mendampingi. Besar harapannya kepada rekan-rekan panitia untuk nanti bisa menghubungkan antara rekan-rekan peserta dengan rekan-rekan mentor dalam waktu dekat, sehingga tadi pengalaman dari workshop ini juga bisa terus diperkaya setiap waktunya. Saya kira demikian dari saya. Mohon maaf kalau ada yang kurang. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Terima kasih.
Salam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kasih.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. Izin live ya Pak.
Izin live ya Pak.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Izin Pak. Ya.
Izin live ya.
Izin live Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih.
Sama-sama.
Terima kasih.
Izin live.